fiction and not real stuff.
Yeah.
I just have one book.
You have to get these. Oh, are we? Yes. You can do it tomorrow.
All right. If you didn't get one of these yet, you're gonna need one. And these are something that you're gonna want to bring
Hey, you're going to the Y.
to class every day.
You're good, man.
Now we aren't officially
Probably a little bit.
like starting reading these per se yet. But if you wanted to get ahead, eventually you will be responsible for reading.
I know you.
Yes.
This book is the bomb. That's why I love it.
Well,
Your mother.
I appreciate that. You don't even know how much. Because I usually make that joke and you beat me to it. So now I'm a little angry, but I'm happy at the same time because it was fantastic, but you stole my thunder because I usually say, hey guys, this is the bomb. And then you're like,
Ha ha ha.
yeah, wait, it is book. Anyway, so, Edwards, come on, just
Fly fishing.
go with it for once in your life.
I was laughing.
Yeah, but it was a fake laugh. Edward was like, father. Okay. All right.
I don't miss your smile.
Okay. Did you start that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good.
Right when the bell rang.
Wow, that's perfect. That was all on camera. Great. Forgot about the camera. Hi, camera. Okay. So, yes, we will be reading these eventually, and eventually you will be getting a kind of discussion guide that goes with this, and we'll have a day where we'll actually discuss the first part of the book, and then we'll also later on have a day where we discuss kind of the second part of this book. Now, I am a history nerd, and I love this book. I think it's fantastic. There's a lot of cool pieces of this book. Really what this book does is it hits you with World War II, but it also hits you with some sub-pieces of World War II that not a lot of people know about. So some of the atomic bomb, building it, stealing secrets to build it, espionage, sabotage, really cool stuff, okay? So this book I think is fantastic, and we'll learn a lot about war, spying, sabotage, and those types of things through this book. This book is considered a historical fiction. Everything in this book is absolutely true, but the person writes it in story form. So it's called historical fiction. All right. Now, why you're getting these also today is because I'm going to introduce something to you. Eventually, you will be doing a full research project in this class. Okay? Eventually, you will do a full research project as part of this class. Prior to doing the full research project, we do something called a mini HIT. HIT stands for Historical Investigation of a Topic, which is what our project's called, okay? So we do a mini HIT project first. And really all it is, and I have it on Canvas, so if you want to pop it on Canvas, I'll show you what I'm talking about. And then I'll actually explain to you what the homework for today will be, like for Monday. But then we're going to kind of do an activity in class to kind of get us towards that assignment. Okay? So if you could, first you can access Research Bomb Mini Hit 2020, it'll be called. Okay, so open that up. I'm going to quick open that up too, and just talk about a couple of things. I'm not going to go over all of this, but you can know that that this will be due for you guys Monday, December 14th. Okay,
That's a week from now.
for your actual mini hit project that's due on the 14th, all you'll have to do is basically get a topic related to World War II or from this bomb book, which is all kind of about World War II. You will have to find two sources. One has to be a primary source. And then you're going to do an APPARTS, analyzing basically these sources, breaking these sources down, and putting proper citations for them together in a PowerPoint. And then you're presenting it in a small group, and that'll be this project basically. So that's not for a week. We'll do some things to get you there, step by step, so that when this is due, you'll kind of have some time to have put this together. Now, I'm sharing this with you now because your goal for Monday will be to select a topic, will be to find two sources and tell me why one's primary and what the second source is. Okay? So one of the things you could do to find these sources is actually open up your bond books to page, let's see here, 243. On page 243 of your bond books is a source list that the author put together to write this book. You could find a source there, but the thing is you have to make sure that you can access that source somehow because you'll have to analyze it, right? You
These
have
like
to do
new?
an APPARTS for it. What?
Are these like new books? Like
These books were purchased, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Something like that. But if you wanted to look at the sources and find something, this would be maybe a place to start. There's obviously other places to look up and find sources, okay? One of them has to be primary. And today we're going to do kind of go through a PowerPoint that talks about primary and secondary sources and helps you understand how you would do an APPARTS, and we'll practice together today. But that's something that you'll have to do by the 14th. Again, for tomorrow, or well, for Monday of next week, let me show you exactly what you have to put together. So on Canvas, it says bomb mini hit sources. Okay, if I open that up, there's a document here. This is all you have to have for Monday. Let me zoom in. For Monday, you have to have a topic, what your secondary source is, or your primary source is, why it's a primary source, what your second source is, and if it's primary or secondary and why. And again, today we'll go through the differences between primary and secondary. Today we will look at an APPARTS so that you kind of understand how you break down a source. And then again, the 14th, another week from Monday, is when you actually have to bring it in and have it ready and present to a small group, okay, which we'll talk more about next week specifically, okay, to help you get there. You will also, I believe, have one full work day in class, so I can come around and help you, and I think that's at the end of next week where you'll have that time, okay? I threw a lot at you. How are we doing? Making some sense though?
mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for today though, and if you'd like to open this up and follow along, we are going to go through this PowerPoint called APPARTS Review Slides, okay? So I have it open. We're going to go through this together. Keep your books out because we'll actually be using something in the books eventually too today, but let's talk. So, what do you know, because I know that you've learned this at some point, what's a primary source and why? Who can tell me what a primary source is and why? Okay, a source from the time. What is it? What do you mean by that?
So like, if it's a newspaper.
Come on, Hanson.
We're learning about the war of 1812. You get a letter from 1812.
That's perfect, okay? Sometimes we call that an eyewitness account, but yes, usually it's time specific. If you're studying the War of 1812 and you have a letter from someone that's in 1812 and they're talking about that, that is beautiful from Balski. It is a primary source. It's an eyewitness account. It's from the time period that you're studying. That's excellent. By the way, do we find more accuracy in primary sources or secondary sources? I know we didn't talk about secondary sources yet, but usually is it more accurate for information purposes in a primary or secondary source? What do you think? Correct, okay? Because it's eyewitness, because it's time sensitive, because it's from that time period. Excellent. Okay, so you're very, very correct on primary source. Eyewitness is time period sensitive. Secondary source, what's that? And what is an example? So what's a secondary source, Ben? You guys got primary down. Yeah, go ahead. Dude, you're rocking it.
Secondary source is from like, what's a war about 1812, and you went on a website that told you about the war of 1812.
Okay.
So somebody who told someone who told you.
Kind of, yeah. So someone that did a bunch of research probably used some primary sources to put information together about that event or something, right? So a web page would be an example. A lot of websites then are secondary sources. They have collected a lot of information and put it together, but it's not a primary source. They might have, again, used primary sources to gather information and put that information for you, but it's not a specific document or something from a time period. It is almost like a summary or an explanation of the information, okay? Good source still, a lot of great stuff. You can find really good information in secondary sources, but it is not as trustworthy as maybe something directly from that time period, like a newspaper or letter or diary or whatever, okay? So a lot of times books about an event would then be secondary sources, right? They have gathered information, they wrote about it in a book, a website, those types of things. Excellent, good. You guys are rocking and rolling. This is awesome. I think we already covered that, okay? We already covered that. Well, okay. How about, I'll just tell you, why we use primary and secondary sources, right, is to gather information so that we can then understand something or then write about it, research, right? Okay. Now, I put a little list together, or I kind of found this. I thought it was really nice as a helpful reminder of some examples and kind of like what they are, right? So, and you guys already basically said this. This is just a little bit more on this list. I like looking at examples. Examples help me understand things, okay? But, so for instance, under primary sources, things that we didn't mention, photographs. I think primary source photographs are really important, right? I'm a visual person. I learn a lot from seeing things. So when you see a photograph of, let's even take the War of 1812, like you mentioned, and see what the uniform looked like or what the weapons look like or maybe even the battlefield and the strategy look like, it might help you understand what's going on better. Now, if you have a picture with information, maybe a soldier's diary, or maybe a newspaper article, or a speech from a general or the president, now you can start putting together a pretty accurate picture, right, of the event itself, or what's going on, right? So images along with information, written words. Now, later on, if we had a video recording, so if this was from more of a time period where we have video, would that help us really understand the situation? So like if the event was captured on film, now we really understand what's going on. Or instead of just the speech written out, we could listen to the audio of the person giving the speech, because now we can also tell inflection, right? Not just the words. Sometimes that helps tell the story too, because we can capture emotion and other things in what we hear in a voice, okay? So primary sources, these are some examples. Secondary sources, some examples. The books, I really think this is interesting. They put encyclopedias. Sometimes encyclopedias are considered tertiary sources, but we won't get into that. So Wikipedia, for example, would be considered secondary, right? Okay? Because it's basically an online encyclopedia, okay? And this tells you some places that you can look for these sources, all right? Good. Excellent, excellent, excellent.
What are primary sources? And how are they different?
I'm not going to do that. Okay. That's for those of you at home if you want to watch more about a primary source. Okay. When have you used primary or secondary sources in school? This just he's a dork. Sorry, everybody at home. Mr. Sale has problems. How many of you did he scare? Zach beat his pants. Boyd woke up. Let's go. Okay, so what are some of our experiences then using primary and secondary sources? Obviously, Rombowski knows a lot about this because he could tell me about them, but yeah, go ahead, Nick.
History Day?
Hey, if you went through DC Everest in 8th grade, everyone had to do a History Day project. So if you went through the Everest School District in 8th grade, you had to use these sources to research and do a major research project, right?
It sucked.
Well, it was demanding, right? There was a lot. However, doing that and some of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into History Day, this will be a breeze to you when we do our research process. It will. It's way less demanding, but now you have some skills to help you actually do this to a pretty high level, where that you should probably all get A's on this problem. Like for real. Like History Day is way over the top compared to what we're going to ask you to do in our research project. Okay? Now, so if you're looking up things, you've used now places that you probably didn't even realize that use primary and secondary sources. If you like to read articles about certain things, if you're interested in sports, how many of you read articles that tell you about sports? Guarantee a bunch of you. How about like if you're into fashion and you read articles about fashion, or you're into music and you read articles about music, or listen to different music, or you're interested in the news, so you participate in watching the news or doing research about a certain topic in the news that you want to find more about. Then you've all done some sort of research where you've actually looked into, without even realizing that's what you're doing, primary and secondary sources. Okay? So most of the time you're doing this, probably you're like thinking about a big research project like the History Day thing, or for school stuff you're looking into and reading and analyzing. But some of you do it for fun and you don't even realize that's what you're doing, right? Which is really kind of fun to think about. All right, so one of the ways that we think is important to kind of understand a source, to analyze a source, is something called APPARTS, okay? How many of you have heard of or used APPARTS before? Okay, like one of you, okay? So basically what it does is it gives you ways to break down the source so you can better understand it, okay? So the APPARTS stands for, right? Each letter stands for a word. So we have author. So who's this from? Where's this source from? Who wrote it, or who said it, or where is it coming from? Okay. So it might be a person, it might be a magazine, it might be a newspaper. But what is the author of the source? Where is it coming from? Okay. Place and time, super important. Will place and time basically tell us, in some sense, whether it's a primary or secondary source? Sometimes it does. Because if it's a book written about the Civil War and it was published in 2003, we already immediately know it's a secondary source because it was not during the Civil War when this was published, right? The Civil War was back in the 1860s. Okay? Now, if it's a photograph of Civil War soldiers and it says 1863 Battle of Bull Run as the caption, and it's black and white, and oh, well, this is authentic, this is from the time period, this is a primary source. So place and time can be such an indicator for us to tell us some things about the source, okay? Prior knowledge, what do you know ahead of time about this event, or maybe even what you're reading or looking at or listening to? So what do you know already? What's your prior knowledge? What's your background on this subject already? Okay, that's what prior knowledge is. Audience, who was this intended for? Who is this source intended for? If it's a diary, who's that source intended for? If it's someone's diary, who's that source intended for? For just themselves, right? So, Anne Frank's diary, Diary of Anne Frank, has it been read by lots of people? Was it intended to be read by lots of people? It was literally for herself, but it became a very famous document that's now been turned into a book, right? That a lot of people read, okay? Especially in American history. right? A lot of people have read the Diary of Anne Frank. But it's important to know who the audience was really for. Yeah.
That seems like an invasion of privacy.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is it history?
Yes.
Can we learn from history?
Yes.
Okay, that's why we read it, right? So, was it intended for a lot of people to read? No. But she died as a part of the Holocaust, and now we can learn from her words. And by the way, if you've ever read it or know anything about it, it's some of the most brilliant thoughts and writing that we can find from that time period on what was happening. It's incredible, okay? But I know what you're saying. If it's a diary that we're reading, it's kind of weird, right? Because most people don't want others to read their diary, because it's personal, it's private. It's just your thoughts about something. And also, we usually see people upset if someone grabs their diary and reads it. Or we usually see it portrayed in movies or shows, someone grabs it and starts reading all this juicy information that you don't want out there. What's funny is, you know what a digital diary is? A blog. Right? People write blogs but really what it is their own thoughts. They're just able to put it on the internet and thousands and millions of people can read it. And sometimes people get famous for being really good at blogging, which is honestly digital diaries. That's what I think of them. Okay? All right, reason. Why was this source produced at the time it was produced? Why is this there? Like, so for Anne Frank's diary, we'd say, well, she's just writing down her thoughts and feelings about what's happening to her. Okay? If it's a newspaper article, maybe it's more specific. They wanted to report on this thing that was happening. Or there's different reasons for different sources, right? The main idea, what's the whole point of this source? What's the whole point? What's the main idea? And then finally the significance, which sometimes can be similar to the main idea, but not always. So what's the significance? Why is this source important? What's the big takeaway from this source? What conclusions can we draw from this source? Okay? So this is how we would break down and analyze a document. So this is just one of the small things that you have to do for the big project. By the big project, I mean the mini hit, which is due the 14th. Remember, for this Monday, all you have to do is a topic, dealing with World War II or the bomb book, at least one primary source that deals with that topic, and another source, doesn't have to be primary, by the way, and then you'll just do 2 APPARTS for it. That's what you're basically putting together, and their citations, which again, we'll talk more about later. So, let's analyze something together, okay? Here's what I'd like you to do. Turn to page 238 in your bomb books. 238 in your bomb book. So we're going to look at a letter that Albert Einstein, you guys know who Albert Einstein was? Right? Pretty famous physicist. Came up with a lot of different stuff, but considered one of the most brilliant men in history, okay, Albert Einstein. Well, the backstory really quick is Albert Einstein found out that the Germans, prior to World War II and right at the beginning of World War II, possibly figured out how to build an atomic weapon. Most physicists at the time thought this was impossible because fission hadn't been invented yet and had just been discovered. Some physicists come to Einstein, who is on vacation, and they tell him about it. He said, we have to tell the President of the United States. At the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who we know from Panic and the New Deal and Great Depression, right? So Albert Einstein writes this letter to Franklin D. Roosevelt and warns Franklin D. Roosevelt of what's possibly happening over in Germany. They might be building this new weapon that the world's never seen before and tries to explain its powerful properties and what it could do if the Germans make this weapon. Okay? Is it making sense so far? What we're going to do is we're going to look at the document together. We're going to read it. And then we're going to start breaking down APPARTS to help us understand how we would do that. Make sense so far? By the way, I hyperlinked that image. So if you were like, if you had this up on in front of you, like the PowerPoint in front of you, and you click on this, it will take you to what I think is one of the most incredible places to find primary sources. And if I were you, if you didn't find stuff in the back of BOM to find sources for a topic you're interested in, I would go here. So let me just show you it very, very quickly. It's called docsteach.org. It is from the National Archives of the US government, where they have been for years and years and years digitalizing all these primary source documents of American history. So, like if I click on this, right, it takes me to DocsTeach, and I actually linked the exact document that they have digitally. So you can actually go there and you can like search, and you can zoom in, you know, you can do all this stuff, you can print it, you know, it tells you a little bit about it. And guess what, which might be really handy for you, instead of going into a citation maker, it actually gives you a full citation at the bottom. It's pretty sweet. Anyway, so you can search where you can go explore, right? You see where it says explore primary source documents. You could go and look for things dealing with the topic of your interest and find two sources, to your APPARTS, put your citations on this thing, and you'd be good in a week. Does that make sense? So this is a sweet source. So I wanted to show you that you can find this document that you have in the book in front of you there and other primary sources. Okay, so let's go back to the document itself. Let's go back to, well, first to here and then back to the document. Give me a second because I want to go to hit present mode again. Okay, so I'm also there. So what I'll do is I'll read aloud. What I want you to do is, you can have, if you have a piece of paper, you can have that out, or I want you to be thinking about the APPARTS, because we're going to try to break it down together a little bit, all right? From this document, how we would find audience, place and time. We're going to kind of do this as a practice together, so you're kind of ready to do this on your own. So if I'm looking at this document, I'll read, I'll kind of go through it with you, and then we're going to try to break it down together. Starting at the top, Albert Einstein, Old Grove Road, Nassau Point, Peconic, Long Island, which by the way is in New York. August 2nd, 1939. Do we already know something about date and a little bit about place and time? We already do. But notice, we also know who this is going to. F.D. Roosevelt, President of the United States, White House, Washington, D.C. If you were doing place and time, first of all, author, right? You already know a little bit of Albert Einstein, right? If you're doing place and time, would you also, so would you do the date, which is August 2nd, 1939, but place, would you put both Long Island, New York, and possibly White House, Washington, D.C.? I would say yeah, right? Because this is a letter starting from one place, going to another place. I think it would be important to do for place and time to do both. Okay, so here's what it says. Sir, and remember this is coming from world-renowned physicist Albert Einstein to the President of the United States of America. Sir, some recent work by E. Fermi and L. Szilard, which has been communicated to me in manuscript, leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate future. Certain aspects of the situation which has arisen seem to call for watchfulness and, if necessary, quick action on the part of the administration. I believe, therefore, that it is my duty to bring to your attention the following facts and recommendations. Okay? So I'm going to stop there for a second. Let's look at the APPARTS document again. Okay? So we ready, again, you could be writing this down. This is good practice. This is something that you could then look back to as a model when you're doing your own to make sure you're doing it correctly. So if you want to physically write this down or have like a doc open and do your own or whatever. But so author, we know it's Albert Einstein, right? And we can even put a little bit about the author. Albert Einstein, world-renowned physicist, right? Because does that help us understand the significance of this document? Yeah, it does. Not just the name of who the author, but who the author is, right? That's important. Okay? Place and time, again, well, we know Long Island, New York, and I would put, even like letter from Long Island, New York to White House, Washington, D.C., or to President Roosevelt, right? I would maybe put that for place and time, and I would also put August 2nd, 1939, right? I'd actually put all those things under place and time. For prior knowledge, what do we know about FDR? What do we know about FDR? Just a little bit. We don't have to write a book about prior knowledge, but what are some things we know about FDR that might be important to put there? He's the President of the United States. Has he been the President for a little while? So it's 1939. When did he get elected? Do we remember? 1932. So he's been, prior knowledge might be good to go, okay, President of the United States, FDR, since 1932. He's been president for a long time, okay? That's important to know, I think. And then prior knowledge, maybe we'd even include some things about Albert Einstein, world-renowned physicist, because would it be meaningful for the President of the United States to get something from this world-renowned physicist? Because if I wrote a letter to the President, what are the odds that the President would actually read it? Super low. If the letter's from Albert Einstein, pretty high. Make sense? Okay? Prior knowledge will help us make sense of some of this information, right? What we know already. Okay? Who's the audience then of this letter? Who's this letter intended for? We've kind of answered it already. Paul? The President. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. So the audience is really to the President, and I'd also maybe say kind of to warn our nation, right? To warn the President so he knows, right, ahead of time, right? That might go into reason a little bit. Reason this is written, okay? To warn the President of what, though? What is he going to, we just read that first, even if we haven't read anything else, from the first paragraph, what is he going to warn the President about?
Germany.
Okay? Yeah, well, that's not even in the first paragraph yet, but we know it is going to be about Germany. But what's in the first paragraph that he says is pretty important? Uranium. Okay? A new and important source of energy, and then he mentions uranium, right? The element uranium. So that's part of the reason here. There's going to be a little bit more possibly too, but that's part of the reason we can determine that already. Let me continue reading, and then we'll try to kind of come up with the rest here. Make sense? Let's keep reading here. In the course of the last 4 months, it's been made probable through the work of Joliet in France, as well as Fermi and Szilard in America, that it may become possible to set up a nuclear chain reaction in a large mass of uranium, by which vast amounts of power and large quantities of new radium-like elements would be generated. Now it appears almost certain that this could be achieved in the immediate future. This new phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs. And it is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may thus be constructed. A single bomb of this type, carried by boat and exploded in a port, might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory. However, such bombs might very well prove to be too heavy for transportation by air. Does he know much yet, though? Nope, because we already know, if we fast forward to 1945, that these 2 bombs were actually delivered by air to be dropped on Japan, right? So we already know ahead of time, like, okay, we have some prior knowledge, right, about this. However, they don't know yet because it's never been done. But he's anticipating and predicting that, holy crap, we know about that they can split uranium atoms, and that could lead to this really terrible weapon, that you need to know about, President Roosevelt. You need to know about this now, okay? Now let's keep going. Because, does he say how terrible the destruction could be? Does he kind of allude to how bad the destruction principles of this weapon could be? Yeah. The United States has only very poor ores of uranium in moderate quantities. So do we have access to uranium in the United States very well? No, we don't. That's a problem if we want to build this, right? There is some good ore in Canada and the former Czechoslovakia, which is in Europe, while the most important source of uranium is in Belgian Congo. Anybody know where that is? In Africa. In view of this situation, you may think it desirable to have some permanent contact maintained between the administration and the group of physicists working on chain reactions in America. So is he making a suggestion now? Hey, you might think that you might want to get together some scientists who know a little bit about this and start figuring out a way that we can figure out how to best move forward as a nation with this information. Okay? One possible way of achieving this might be for you to entrust with this task a person who has your confidence and would perhaps serve in an unofficial capacity. His task might comprise of the following. So now he's going to give some advice. Here's what I think you could do, Mr. President. To approach government departments, keep them informed of further development, and put forward recommendations for government action, giving particular attention to the problem of securing a supply of uranium ore for the U.S. So he says, hey, maybe you want to come up with like a group that works on this problem, and one of the things you might want to consider doing is getting a bunch of uranium, because it's kind of important to have if you want this to build this, right? Not only that, if you get a bunch of uranium, who doesn't have it?
Germany.
Well, possibly your enemy, right? Would that also be a part of that? I think so. All right, B, to speed up the experimental work, which is at present being carried out within the limits of the budget of the university laboratories, by providing funds, if such funds be required, through his contacts with private persons who are willing to make contributions for this cause, and perhaps also by obtaining the cooperation of industrial laboratories which have the necessary equipment. So where is a lot of this research being done currently, does he say? Where is this happening right now? Anyone catch that in that section, B? Where is it happening? University laboratories. Research for this is being done at colleges. And he's going, dude, like, get some funding to these things, or figure out a way to kind of get private industry involved, and maybe have these people work together so we can actually figure this out. Does that make sense? And then finally he says, I understand, this is the kicker, ready? I understand that Germany, now, is the United States, do we know, is the United States involved in fighting World War II in 1939 yet? Anybody know? Prior knowledge here, not yet. We do not join, the United States of America does not join World War II until 1941, after what major event? Pearl Harbor. Okay, so we get attacked by Japan in Hawaii, at our naval base Pearl Harbor. That's when we actually fight in World War II. But are we backing some of our allies with weapons and supplies at this time? Yes, we are. France and Great Britain, we are giving them weapons and supplies and backing them in the war at that time. Okay. So I understand that Germany has actually stopped the sale of uranium from Czechoslovakian mines, which she has taken over. So has Germany grabbed and gobbled up land and valuable land that has uranium, and are they allowing the sale of that anymore? So they have the land, they took it, they are not getting rid of it, they are keeping it, they're not selling it off. Why is that a problem, or why is that a major warning sign? Why would this be incredibly disturbing news to get if you're FDR? Paul?
Because you want the uranium, and they have a lot of it.
You would want the uranium, they have a lot of it, and could they know why it's important? Could they then be trying to develop this terrible weapon? Oh crap, right? Like that would be not good. Because guess what? Would they have a head start? Do they have access to this powerful element? Okay, so do you see why this is kind of major news for President Roosevelt? Okay. That she should have taken such early action might perhaps be understood on the ground that the son of the German Undersecretary of State, von Weizsäcker, is attached to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, where some of the American work on uranium is now being repeated. Yours very truly, A. Einstein, Albert Einstein. Okay, so we know for a fact, with this last part, that they are actually studying this in German laboratories, that they're actually figuring this out right now. Again, a little scary in the United States of America and what the possibilities are for Nazi Germany to have this weapon. By the way, in hindsight, we could look back and go, would the war have gone very differently had Germany developed an atomic bomb before the United States? That would be a problem, right? History would be completely different. We might not be sitting here. Okay? So this is a massive deal that Albert Einstein would warn Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President of the United States, and then we were able to set in motion a lot of things. Now, so that's a bunch of history. So what I would want you to think about is reason, okay? The reason the letter is written, we're warning President Roosevelt about uranium and the possibilities of Germany having it. The main idea, hey, you need to take action and put together people to maybe come up with a way to work on this situation with uranium and possibly a bomb. Significance, do you think that this warning helped push things into motion in the United States to maybe work on uranium and maybe building the bomb? Yeah, it's called the Manhattan Project. Now, before we go, let me show you and remind you of your homework that you will turn in on Canvas by Monday when I see you again. I also want to remind you, some of you are coming in to see me this Friday. Now, if you want to come in prior to like our class time, if you want to come in the morning and work for an hour, I'm fine with that. Or if you want to stay longer than that, that's fine. But there are people that need to get some work done, tests, required assignments for panic, a lot of, okay. Before you go, remember, let me show you. Your job is right here. Find a primary source, well, find a topic, World War II related or from this book. A primary source about that topic. It's primary source because we talked about that today. My second source is, it could be secondary, but it could also be another primary, and it's a primary or secondary source because. That's literally all you have to do for Monday. We cool? All right, get the heck out of here. What are you